Frameworks have been changing so much over the last few years. Sadly, the adoption has not been going as great. Specifically, it seems like the sentiment for a lot of these new frameworks is going down. Not just Next, but Nuxt, Svelte, Solid, and more seem to be seeing a decline in excitement and adoption for their frameworks. What the heck is going on here? What might be a 0.1 or a 0.2 drop in here, industry-wide, could be a lot larger. And I think we need to dive deep into these numbers first, and then afterwards we can start to understand why they look like this. So what numbers am I talking about? Obviously, the State of JS survey, which I was lucky enough to co-write a conclusion with Cassidy Williams. So Cassidy and I both wrote our thoughts. Since I wrote this, I've talked with a lot of the people who built these frameworks and got some different takes on things that I hadn't thought about before, which is why I wanted to take the time to discuss this in a video. I highly recommend checking out this whole survey. If you haven't, it's great. I think Prime just posted like a 2-hour video where he goes through the whole thing. I'm not going to do that, but I do want to break down what happened here. This is the chart I want to spend most of our time thinking about. It might look a little chaotic, so I'll do my best to quickly explain what it does. This is a 2-dimensional graph. Up, down is used versus not used, which is why Webpack and React are so high up here, because most people taking the survey have used Webpack and React. Positive opinions the right and negative is the left. The first outstanding obvious thing here is that we look here with the Webpack graph and we see it has moved from generally positive and really popular to slightly more popular, but way more negative. It's actually went over that middle line where it's now leaning negative. If this was just Webpack going down like that, that'd be one thing. But it seems like a lot of things are having this left move. Like Mocha shifted left. Next is shifting left. Cypress is shifting left. Rollup went left and then right a bit, which is interesting. We have Jest, which I think shifting left is fair for. Obviously, React going left. It initially did with server components, then it stayed about the same, then it got worse again. Yeah. It's also crazy because it was so positive up until 2020 before that left shift started. But if we were to even go in here and look at more new things, like Svelte is starting to move leftward. It's going up still, but it's going left too. React Native had a pretty hard shift left. Electron is shifting left. Angular's had a chaotic journey, but that's Angular. Who would expect anything else? SvelteKit moving left is scary. Vue shifted left really hard in 2020. It's mostly stabilized since, but still suffered from a pretty significant shift in that regard. This gets a little chopped in this view, but Nuxt has also went slightly further left. So what's going on here? Why is everything seeing this leftward shift? Why is the entire JavaScript ecosystem seemingly getting more negative? I have some thoughts. I think I want a diagram for this. Before we get to that, I do want to call out one positive thing, which is Astro. Astro is still seeing pretty solid growth, which is why it's going upwards, but it's not seeing the same shift towards the negative direction. So it's going up and slightly right. It's possible this will start trending left in the next update when we do this survey at the end of the year. But for now, it seems like Astro is one of the few frameworks that is not seeing this leftwards trends towards the negative. So what's going on? The first thing I want to point out when we look at these is that most of the things seeing a negative shift are also seeing upwards movement. In fact, most of them saw a significant amount of upwards movement, slight movement to the right, and then a hard shift to the left. So it seems like there's almost certainly a pattern here, even with like React and Webpack. Vete's also been immune largely, but tools like Electron, React Native, Svelte was in here. Yeah, Svelte seeing upwards trends, but also moving to the left. There's a reason for that. I want to draw a clear distinction between types of developers. Type 1, devs who chose their stack, and type 2, devs who work on a stack they didn't choose. I want to highlight a massive difference between these types of people. To be very clear, just because you are one of these types of devs right now doesn't mean you aren't the other one sometimes or at other points. Like you could be a type 2 at work where you're stuck working in an old Angular code base you hate, and then at home, you're working on your own fun things in Svelte. There's an important difference between these types of people though, specifically the mindsets that they have when they work with the technologies in one of these buckets. If you're using some tech because your company chose it, and now you feel kind of stuck on it, it's going to be a lot harder to enjoy that technology. When you pick something, you're inherently so much more likely to enjoy the thing simply because you made that decision. This is a thing I push really hard in a lot of my work. For those who weren't here day one, I had a very popular video really early on the channel where I did a mock job interview with Dan Abramov. The main reason I wanted to do this is I had seen the other interviews he was doing and knew he was a really talented dev. So I wanted to be sure that devs like him could succeed with a good interview process. And I felt like a lot of the interviews I was seeing and the interviews people would give him would not highlight his skills properly. So I asked if he would be down to do a quick interview. He was down. And this blew up. This was a huge part of why my channel was successful early. Massive shout out to Dan for being willing to do this, and also to the community for watching this and taking this video as well as they did. I have a interview guide that I wrote, and this is why I wanted to talk about this right now. I make an interview guide like this for the vast majority of the technical interviews that I do, that I'm in control of, where I need to vet a person's technical ability. I'll be honest though, I'm in a very privileged position right now where I have literally thousands of super talented engineers that really want to work for me. And most of those engineers have enough good public work that I wouldn't need to technically interview them. I can interview them for culture fit, team fit, what stuff they want to work on, stuff like that. But I have so many people who have already proven themselves technically that my need to do like a technical interview with somebody is a lot lower. But I wrote this before then when I didn't have that infinite set of people, and filtering for good ones was much harder. So it's still useful info. The reason I bring this up here though has nothing to do with my interview experience. It has everything to do with the value of this document. This document gives every interview candidate 4 options. They have the traditionalist, which is your usual leak code interview, the pragmatist, which is a more fitting problem for the type of role they're going for. So I'll give you a mini React app with a fake backend to build on if you're going for a front end role, stuff like that. I have an example problem here as well. Option 3, the realist, which is bring your own repo and we'll shadow you as you work in it. So you hit us up ahead of time saying, hey, I want to work on this project. I have been working on this on the side. I have this bug I want to fix or this feature I want to add. We take a quick look ahead. We say, yeah, that looks good. And then we just pair for the interview. And then option N, the specialist, which is bring your own interview plan. If you think you have a way to better showcase your abilities to me than what I've listed here, let me know and we can do that. It's great. It's great. So why the hell am I bringing this up here? Well, the reality is that even though we have all these options, I'd say 2/3-ish pick the pragmatist and the remainder pick the traditionalist. The value of these options isn't that people pick any one of these options. I'm not using what they pick to judge them or anything. It's that the act of giving them options makes them feel more in control of the process, which makes them much more positive, much more open, much more excited, accepting, and generally feeling in control. And when you have that feeling, when you feel like you understand what's next, you have some control, some say, some ownership of that process, you're so much more likely to do good work and be successful. And I architected my interview process around that. How can I set up my team to be as successful as possible? So that's why I bring this up. And if we go back to my diagram, you might see where we're going here. When the dev gets to choose the tech they're working in themselves, even if they pick the same thing, a dev who's working in React because it was what their code base already had versus a dev who picked React and is now using it, the one who picked React, even if otherwise they're exactly the same person, the one who made that choice is going to feel so much stronger about that thing, and almost certainly is going to feel more positive about it too. That's why I think this upward trend is so interesting, because when something gets more popular, usually that implies there are fewer people using it that chose it. As something hits a certain threshold of popularity, it stops being a choice and it starts being a default. And once you're stuck with defaults, not choosing the thing you want to choose, that's when the sentiment starts to tank. And that's what I feel like is going on here, especially with React, where people felt like they had to use React because it's what everyone's using in their code bases. It's what every company is hiring for. So they started using React. They learned enough React. It was flatlined for the positivity for years. And then React started making changes, specifically the server component stuff. And now all of these devs who felt like they got forced into this, but at least they learned it and understood it now, they saw everything changing around them. So if they felt like if they had to learn this much to know React, and they didn't want to, like their interests are somewhere else. If their interests were like here, if they want to work on other things like, let's say, animations or CSS hacks, like these things all have some overlap with the React bubble, but if it's not what their focus is, not what they want to be doing, that's going to feel awful. And then when React comes out and says, hey, by the way, we're doing server components now, they didn't choose React. They're stuck living in this tiny area of overlapping interest where this is the only section that they feel excited about is where these things overlap. And now React is doing things way over here that don't benefit them in the things they're interested in. They didn't choose React. They're using React because they have to. They're trying to force their interests, their goals, the things that excite them into their corner of React. But in order to call themselves a React engineer, they feel like they have to learn this other thing that's a big distance away from where they want to be. Like their goal is to live in this bubble. You could even draw a line here. Like I'll just draw it here and say like stack split, where on the left here is the front end side and front end interests, and on the right is the server side and server interests. And with server components happening, knowing React now means knowing more about the server. And a lot of people don't like that. In that feeling that the bubble that they weren't interested in is expanding, but it's expanding in the direction they don't want it to. Feels as though they are now being forced to learn all of these things that are outside of their interests. And that feeling sucks. It genuinely does. And we've seen pushback for this in a lot of places. Like I've seen a lot of outrage recently about the Vue 2 to Vue 3 move to the composition API. Thankfully, Evan wrote this really nice reasoning for why he made this change, which if I know my timing correct, and if there's any Vue people here, correct me if I'm wrong. My gut is that the huge leftward shift happened when Vue 3 and composition API really started taking off. Am I correct that Vue 3 was 2020-ish? Thank you to everybody who confirmed. Vue's shift left is almost perfectly aligned with the move to Vue 3 and the shift towards the composition API. The composition API is, to be frank, a lot more hooky. I love how they describe this here. This diagram shows great how your logical concerns get mixed up with the options API, which was the Vue 2 way of integrating third-party packages and things. So here we see all of these concerns getting mixed. Each color is a specific concern. So at the start, we have to, in the data layer, attach all of the state for all the different things that this component can do. Even if these things don't have any relation with each other, they all have to go here. And then we have to call out all of these additional things that are their own concerns for the most part. And then we have to write these blocks that reference those concerns and intermingle between them and shit. This is what they described as the common Vue 2 experience. Notice how code dealing with the same logical concerns is forced to be split under different options located in different parts of the file. In a component that is several hundred lines long, understanding and navigating a single logical concern requires constantly scrolling up and down the file, making it much more difficult than it should be. Absolutely agree. React had this problem too before hooks. This is how it looks when it's refactored using composition API. I love this diagram. I love this so much. It perfectly showcases why this change was made. Each logical concern lives in its box, and then you just return the HTML at the bottom. But this change is something that Vue devs didn't want to do. The reason they picked Vue is it felt the most like just writing HTML and JavaScript and CSS. Their goal was to not learn something. That's part of why they picked Vue. And now with the composition API, you have to learn more Vue. And they did not like that. Especially now, I've been seeing more outrage saying that Vue 2 was the peak of web dev and it's only gone downhill since. That perspective comes from people who didn't pick Vue because they liked Vue. They picked Vue because they didn't like other things. And they didn't like wanting to learn all of these new tools and technologies and things. They saw React, said, that's moving too much. I want something simpler, more focused and stable. And then this happened and they all got mad. This is also happening in Svelte right now. Svelte introduced runes. The goal of runes was to make it so you could write reactive code for Svelte outside of Svelte files, because Svelte files changed what the equal sign means. And when they did that, it forced things to work differently. But that also means if you're writing code in a JS file for a library, getting that code to be reactive inside of Svelte was not easy enough. As they said here, a common piece of feedback we get is, I wish I could write all my JavaScript like this. When you're used to things inside of components magically updating, going back to the boring old procedural code feels like going from color to black and white. The goal of runes was to make it so they could write this code in a way that worked in files that weren't Svelte files. And they did that by wrapping the signals they wanted to update with their $state calls. At first glance, this might seem like a step back, perhaps even unsvelte-like. Isn't it better if let count is reactive by default? Well, no. The reality is that as applications grow in complexity, figuring out which values are reactive and which ones aren't can get tricky. And this heuristic only works for let declarations at the top level of a component, which can cause confusion. Having code behave one way inside of a .svelte file and a different way inside of a JS file can make it hard to refactor code. For example, if you need to turn something into a store so that it can be used in multiple places. Yep. This is another huge point that I want to emphasize here, which is that a part of why we're starting to have these feelings is the code bases we're actually building with these things are getting more complex. If the code base that you adopted Svelte for in 2019 was nice, small, and simple, and now it's been 5 years of you adding more and more things to it and Svelte making more and more changes, the complexity is just expounding. It's getting so large, and that is frustrating for obvious reasons. You start to see the flaws in the tools that you're using. I've seen this all over the place, even in the React ecosystem. I saw a post on Reddit recently where somebody was complaining endlessly that React doesn't scale and every large React code base is a disaster. The harsh reality is that every large code base is a disaster. Another one of the reasons that we see upwards then leftwards is as the adoption goes up, the age of these code bases starts to go up too. And as these code bases get older and they have more complexity within them, we start to realize that every big code base sucks. And it's very easy to blame the tools you're using when your code bases start being unpleasant to work in. That shift represents a combination of things. It represents the frustration with the changes the framework is making. It represents the people who didn't choose to use this technology that feel forced to use it now. And it represents the complexity of the code bases we've made with these technologies getting worse over time, resulting in us having worse feelings about the technologies that we're using. I know that my feelings about Webpack were much more negative much earlier than others because I was upgrading the Webpack versions on a code base with 500 people contributing to it, and it was miserable. So I hated Webpack before it was cool to hate Webpack. This is the thing I really want to call out, though, is a lot of the reason people are getting frustrated with these things aren't necessarily the technologies getting worse or changing or these things happening. It's almost entirely the trends that are inherent to things getting more popular. When things get more popular, they're used more often by people who didn't choose them in code bases that are messier. The quality of the average engineer choosing them goes down as well, where like, if you're picking Svelte right now, you're probably a better engineer than the average JavaScript engineer. I know that sounds crazy coming from me, the React guy, that the average Svelte engineer is probably a better dev than the average React engineer, but that's simply a nature of the type of person who's choosing Svelte versus is stuck working in React. Because if you chose to use Svelte, you're deep enough to know about these options, you're deep enough to make decisions like that, and you're excited about this new solution. Those things make you a much better engineer on average. But if Svelte gets really popular, the quality of the average Svelte engineer is going to start going down, and we're going to see them have a similar shift to the left, where the Svelte engineers aren't necessarily people who like and picked Svelte. They become people who are using it because they felt like they had to, or because it's what their company was already using. There's one more thing that's going on here that I really want to call out, though. We saw it a little bit here with things like Next.js and Nuxt and all these other meta frameworks. But I want to talk about meta frameworks a whole bunch more. Or if we look at this chart here, we can look at the positivity around these frameworks over time. And it looks like, I'm assuming, what is green? Yeah, green's Astra. So Astra is still going up. Basically, everything else is flatlined or going down. Next has gone down. Nuxt has gone up a very small amount. Gatsby's obviously going down still. Remix is going down. Astra is going up. 11t is going down. SvelteKit's going up a little bit, but it's largely flatlining. Docusaurus is doing okay, good for them. SolidStart, I guess, wasn't on it last year, but I know that there's been some concerns from Ryan Carniato here. The reason for this is because meta framework stopped being a thing we were just adopting out of excitement. It's not just the positivity that's going down here, though. One of the scariest things here is retention. Basically, everything's retention is going down, which is the percentage of people who are still using it that were using it in the last survey. Everything is plummeting here. That is terrifying. So yeah, Next has dropped from 89 to 75. SvelteKit's gone from 92 to 88. Nuxt is only down 2%. Gatsby's obviously plummeting. Remix is plummeting. To be fair, Remix doesn't exist anymore, but when the survey was taken, Remix still existed. This is terrifying, seeing all of these things pointing so straightly downwards. There's a reason, though. Previously, the people who were adopting these things did it because they wanted to. People would adopt things like Next or Nuxt or Remix because they were tired of existing solutions, tired of building their own framework, which, to be frank, if you were using anything like Create React App or even Vite, you were building your own tooling around it. The goal of Next was originally to get that tooling out of your way so you could just build. And it did a great job at that. But Next was kind of an in-the-know thing. If you knew that Next had a better Webpack config and some good server-side rendering behaviors, you would adopt it just so you would not have to deal with those things anymore. But now Next isn't just a thing you pick because you're in the know. Next has become a thing that you kind of have to pick if you want to stay up to date with the best and most modern React patterns. And that sucks. The fact that Next stopped being a thing people picked because they were excited about it, and now is a thing they pick because they feel like they have to. That's a massive change in how these things are adopted. And previously, meta frameworks were a thing we picked out of excitement. Now they're not. And that's not just a React problem. We see this here with Nuxt as well. Obviously Gatsby, which is React-based. Astro's not getting hit quite as hard, but all of these solutions are seeing dips in positivity and retention because most of these solutions are being picked by people that didn't want to use them in the first place. It, again, feels like additional things you're stuck learning rather than things you were excited about. And that's what I really think is changing here. If we go back to the overall front-end happiness, I think the whole industry is getting a little burnt out on the change. If you were really happy around here, which is when hooks came out, which was a very exciting moment, it felt like web dev was getting simpler and better. Over time, more and more things have been introduced that might not be your specific cup of tea. They might not speak to you and the problems that you've had. And now you feel like you have to carry all of these solutions over, even if they're not the solutions to the problems that you have. Next.js stopped being a better Webpack build for React and started being the meta framework for all the cool new things React is doing. And that shift has changed our communal perspective on Next. It's no longer that, oh, I'll look into it later, or, oh my God, I don't have to worry about Webpack anymore. Now it's, oh, if I want to use the new React stuff, I have to use Next. That sucks. And that feeling is what I think is driving this. Because most of what we're seeing in these numbers, the sentiment change, is coming from feelings. And as crazy as it is to be sitting here breaking down diagrams and talking about vibes, that's the whole point. I think the vibes are changing because people aren't choosing the technologies that we're talking about here anymore. When Next was just a thing you picked because you liked it, obviously you're going to be more positive, but that's not the case anymore. One last thing I really want to talk about here is the state of the industry, specifically the job market. Over time, getting a job in tech, especially in the web dev world, has gotten much harder. It went from, reasonably speaking, if you came out of a boot camp and were capable at React, you could interview with 5 to 10 companies and actually probably get an offer. That's not the case anymore because there are so many more people looking for jobs that have experience and so many fewer job opportunities as companies have cut their headcounts down. That means you feel like you have to stand out more. And in order to do that, you have to be up to date on all the latest things. At least that's what we tell people. And now that you're learning these things, not because you want to, because you're excited about learning them in your spare time, but because you feel like you have to in order to get a job, your mindset going in is going to be much worse. If you feel trapped by the environment around you into learning this thing, rather than excited to see the problems that it can solve for you, you're going to have a rough time and you're going to feel way worse. And it makes obvious sense to me that at the peak of the hiring bubble, which was 2018, pre-COVID, that's when we felt the happiest. And as the market has shifted, as the number of job opportunities has been going down, we have seen this decline. And that makes all the sense in the world to me, that when we were more stable in our jobs, we had more consistent income, we had less worry about our status as engineers, that we were much more willing to experiment and try new things and have fun with it. And now that we don't feel that way, now that many developers fear these things, that feeling's a lot worse. It's also worth noting that this survey only had 20,000-ish people take it. That's not representative of the whole ecosystem. My channel has millions of people watching it every month. There are millions of JavaScript developers that are deep enough to watch content like mine. That's not the average JavaScript developer either. I would be impressed if more than 1/10 of JS devs knew who the hell I was. Because of that, I think it's important to recognize this is a subset of the overall JavaScript developer group that is more interested in new things because they're taking surveys, they're finding these things, they're doing these things. In fact, if we go to resources, the only person who had more write-ins than me was MeDoDev. I am the second most popular source of JavaScript news as an individual, according to this survey. The reason that this is important is it shows people are interested in new technologies and solutions. Like some of the top people here, it's like me, known for talking about all sorts of cool new things. Rich Harris, the guy creating Svelte. Ken C. Dodds, one of the core remix guys for a while, doing lots of good educational content. Evan Yu, who's obviously the Vue guy. Of this top group, only one of them only talks React, which is Kent. I talk about all sorts of other things. Obviously, I lean React, but the top 5 are not React core people anymore. Dan has shifted all the way down to 7. That's because the people who do this survey and pay attention to these things are super, super interested in new solutions. Despite the fact that the average person taking the survey is a nerd about new technologies and solutions, we're still seeing this downward trend. If this was a more general survey that hit devs that weren't checking these surveys all the time or watching my videos all the time, I would expect this number to be even worse. When I talk to people who just use React and don't really watch anything about it, they're not on Twitter or YouTube, they feel even worse. And it's important to know that because what might be a 0.1 or a 0.2 drop in here, industry-wide, could be a lot larger. And that's why I'm scared here. Not just because, we lost 0.2 points in the front-end framework happiness, but because overall, the general web dev community seems to be in a bit of a negative slope right now. I'm still hyped as hell about these things. I still think we're on a great track to make JavaScript in the web better than ever. I hope that comes through in my content. I am genuinely as excited as I seem to be about these things. It's not because Vercel is paying me or whatever. I actually just love what's going on in the modern web and React ecosystems. But I see these numbers and I get scared. I know not everyone can be as excited as I am about these things, but it still breaks my heart to see when they're upset about it. So wanted to talk here a bit about why. I don't have too much else to say here. Let me know in the comments what I missed and how you're feeling about these things too. Until next time, peace nerds.